Hello again. My name's Louise, and this image confesses that I am a brain geek. But the object of my fascination is not the marvellous organ as an isolated object of inquiry. I want to configure the neuro in neuroessentialism in terms of the necessarily hybrid objects that emerge at the intersection of lab, clinic, academy, culture, and self-understanding. I work in the medical humanities and science communication group at the University of Copenhagen's Medical Museum, which has a vast collection of medical artifacts such as these, and curators and academics work together to develop events and exhibitions exploring biomedicine through a focus on its material, aesthetic, affective dimensions. In my Petra Kucha, I'm going to assume these four characters you see in front of you. First, presenting 3 concrete examples that annoy the critic in me, 3 that excite the neuroacolyte. Then, as a tentative orator and therapist, I'll present my approach and some thoughts about some ways forward, plus 2 disciplinary neuroses that often stand in the way of progress. I was most recently annoyed by media reports that Oreos are as addictive as cocaine because they make more pleasure center neurons fire in the rat brain. In addition to the usual complaints about over-extrapolation, this example stands in for my concern that the actually metaphorical nature of such naive ontological collapses is barely acknowledged. My second example is an ad, thinking or drinking, what will it be for your kid? It's not just the scientifically inaccurate, misdescribed and totalizing images I object to, but that scientific knowledge is being used to coerce parents not just towards a particular view of the brain, but via this authoritative fact towards a particular relationship with the child. And finally, a micro rant about the need for conceptual caution as neuroscience ventures into the territory of the humanities. This image points to an fMRI study that aimed to separate neural correlates of beauty versus artistic judgment, but through operationalizing this dichotomy, reduced Lucian Freud to not beautiful and beauty to not Lucian Freud. The first example that excites me is Carl Dieseroth's new blockbuster technique, Clarity, rendering 3D brain volumes transparent. In addition to the obvious, I find this inspiring because Dieseroth thought it essential to approach psychiatry and intact neural systems, so just set out to build the tools to allow him to do this and to share them with the community. As a long-time follower of neuroscience in the media, I'm not only annoyed by the cases I described earlier, but also excited by the increasing diversity of comment, critique and productive engagement, particularly via online media that allows space for technical detail as well as contextualization and stylistic flourish. And finally, this is an image of microbes in the gut, symbolizing my current research interest in taking the gut-brain microbiome axis as a communal, cross-disciplinary challenge to entrenched ideas about personhood. The neuroscientist's brain might now be in the gut, the political philosopher's outside more on the inside, and the humanist human more non-human than not. One way to describe these examples is places where inquiries about the ways we are our brains are mismanaged or advanced, but all implicate scientific method and media, as Watson and Crick very well knew. As I hope these examples demonstrate, my focus on configurations that are not properly either scientific or cultural leads me to interrogate the neuro in neuroessentialism. Not because I don't agree that neuroscience is ever more socially, politically, legally, clinically and culturally important, but because I think the devil is in the ontological detail. But as you can see, when I tried to replace I love brains, my fangirl t-shirt became totally impenetrable. Perhaps I love investigating the mind would be better, expressing my preference for defining matters of shared concern and then developing appropriate interdisciplinary paths, and maybe sometimes that means holding back on delineating mind, brain and related dichotomies. So what does this approach imply? I've taken apart the title to point to one thing I think we could explore in relation to each word. First, brains, coming back to Candace, the turn towards dynamic networks, plasticity and embodied cognition ensures neuroessentialism is vital and here to stay, but also presses the humanities to get over the spectre of biological reductionism. The verb are is where it gets really interesting to me. When we assume a constitutive relation to a plastic, embodied and cultured brain, the whole process from experimental operationalization to integrating its results into lived experience is part of what it is that we're understanding ourselves to be. The possessive our points to questions of who's included when neuroscience enters the real world and with what rights and responsibilities. And here I think we should augment legal and ethical discussions with an attention to the ways that a neuroessentialist approach, just like any other, subtly constrains what we understand by a self, a citizen, and well-being. And finally, turning to the we as pointing to us here, those who engage with the questions of neuroessentialism, i.e. a diverse disciplinary crowd. And in addition to the collaboration, inspiration, or productive conflict that comes from difference, there are also neuroses that affect us in these discussions in ways that I think we should excavate. First, the angst of rhetorical appropriation. This is a Google image search for mirror neurons, whose rhetorical appropriation has prompted angst across the humanities and sciences. And in untangling it, I think we need to better articulate not just concerns about accuracy, but often underlying and untested assumptions about the ethics and effects of communication. The second neurosis, when someone objects to another discipline arbitrating on a topic they think belongs to them, I think the extent to which this is a battle for financial, attentional, and cultural resources, as well as a methodological battle, should be more clearly delineated and brought out into the open. In my work, I attempt to move in this direction, developing interdisciplinary perspectives that interweave public engagement with media and sociological research and interaction with neuroscientists. And I focus on material encounters with scanners, artifacts, and art and design objects as a route for handling and playing with the conflicts that arise. And I end with a quote. Instead of talking about the natural and unnatural, or even nature and culture, we can talk about the parts of nature we prefer and why we prefer them. I love this because it avoids both reductionism and simplistic constructivism and invites us all to explore why we are drawn to particular objects and forms of inquiry. For me, this workshop is a luxurious opportunity to do that. Thank you.